Ladies and gentlemen, picking a character in Valorant can be extremely difficult. Whether you have a character that you're already mastering or you have a character that you want to pick up, I think it'd be helpful if you had a tier list from agents easiest to hardest to master. Speaking of easiest, it is extremely easy for you to smash that radiant like button. Just look on down and smash that like button right now. Anyways, without further ado, let's just jump right into it, shall we? Now, kicking off with the first hero on our list, the easiest hero to master in the entire game, and that's Sage. Now, Sage is the easiest to master for a number of reasons. First off, Sage's abilities basically play themselves. You wall off choke points if you know enemies are coming, you slow orb them off, you heal yourself or teammates that are low. Sage is pretty simple. If we could talk about a few things that you have to learn on Sage in general, it would be generally the perfect ice ricochet spots, but as far as learning how to do something on a hero, this ranks pretty low on skill intensive things to do on Sage. Now, you do need to cover her res and things like that, but generally with Sage, it's not mechanically ability demanding things. It is more of a general play sense or understanding the tempo of the game. That's what you have to master, not just Sage herself. So essentially, she's a big game sense hero. Now, what's great about Sage is that she is undoubtedly the best character in the entire game. And because she is, and she's one of the easiest characters to master, you can put in some small effort into mastering her, and then you'll always be there to flex to her if your main gets picked or if you need her in your ranked games. Now, moving on to the second character on this list, we have Brimstone. Brimstone is fairly easy to master. Specifically, his smokes basically just plant themselves. I mean, really, there's no mechanical skill required in order to use his smokes. His steam beacon's very easy, his smokes are very easy. The only ability that actually takes a fair bit of skill is actually his molly, and molly is still pretty simple. The one thing that I would say is very important and could be difficult to do on Brim is actually throwing your molly from a far distance straight into choke points or straight on the spike, because you could potentially stop a defuse and make it so an enemy couldn't defuse at all with their given time. Now, if you learn this one thing on Brim, then you know all the mechanical things that you need to know on Brim, besides general gunplay and things like that, making him a fairly easy character to play. And that is great because Brim is also an S tier candidate. He is an insanely good hero and he's very easy. What do you know? Sage and Brim are both really easy to learn, and they're two of the best characters in the entire game. Now, moving on to the next character on the list in the easy to master category, we actually have Breach. Now, this one might be a little bit controversial at first, but I assure you after I explain, you'll most likely agree with me. The thing is, Breach's abilities are very easy to use. You look at the top left corner, you see exactly where they're gonna go. You basically get to set up the perfect flash, the perfect engagement every single time. You know exactly where your abilities are gonna go. While there are some general nuances into the tempo of Breach, his skill level and how difficult he is to master is really not that high. Now, once again, almost as if we're setting a trend, Breach is one of the most powerful characters in the entire game, and he is also one of the easiest characters to master. So Sage, Brim, and Breach, all three very easy to master. Now, Breach does up in difficulty to play at a scrim level, but once you learn the basics of Breach, you're just going to be going in and using your abilities, following up with your team. It's going to be pretty simple. You do one thing and you basically repeat the actions every single time. Breach is a character that you have to learn the tempo and the nuances of him, but after that, he's not mechanically demanding at all, and he is pretty straightforward. Now, moving on to the next character in this list, from easiest to hardest to master, we have Phoenix. Now, Phoenix is still pretty easy to master compared to the entire list, but his flashes are quite a bit more difficult to use than Breach's, and there is some extra nuances to a lot of his abilities. Deciding how to use something like Hot Hands, whether it is for area denial or to heal yourself, can be something that is difficult to realize, especially if you're not at max HP. Sometimes the obvious play is not always the right one. Also, learning how to correctly bend his firewall, use his flashes above walls, and use them in a way that doesn't flash his teammates. All these things require a little bit of extra difficulty in order to master, so I'm putting it slightly above Breach. Now, the next character on the list from easiest to hardest is Omen. Now, Omen used to be a lot more difficult to master, but with a lot of his quality of life changes, things are looking up for Omen. Making him easier to master is not necessarily a bad thing. Omen is still a pretty hard character to reach his peaks with, but getting there is a lot easier than it used to be. Throwing out his dart covers is fairly straightforward. Using his ult is very simple, but using his Paramanora can be quite difficult, and teleporting at the right time in battle without enemies spotting you or hearing you, that is a skill in itself. So Omen is definitely amping up the difficulty, and as such, he's up on the list on hardest to master. Now, the next character that we have on the list is actually Raze. Now, at first, everyone thought that Raze was just a no aim, no brain, just mindless character, but Raze has cemented herself as an insanely potent hero and pretty difficult to master. For one, learning all the combos with her blast pack, either using it out in the open, bouncing yourself up, aggressive, defensive, or just using it in combination with your boom bot to throw it into the enemy team. There are a lot of different nuances to that ability, and learning how to throw it into corners and all these things means it's full of depth and versatility. On top of that, learning the perfect bounces for paint shells can change just marginal impact on paint shells to insane impact on paint shells, and it's something that you absolutely need, and the margin for error is much bigger than the margin for error on something like Sage's Slow Orb. So because of those reasons, Raze is perfect middle of the pack from easiest to hardest to master. Now, ramping up the difficulty as far as mastering a hero is concerned, the next hero on the list is actually Viper. Now, Viper is a pretty hard character to master if you're talking about her peaks. First off, she has all of these smoke walls that you have to perfectly know, even if you want to make her viable, making it so that you get these insane rollouts that cover giant parts of the map. On top of that, the difficulty in being Viper means that you have to be an insanely good game sense hero, because oftentimes you will be the spike planner. You have all this LOS blocking abilities and the ability to hide in your ultimate or in your poison cloud, making you the perfect spike carrier, and that always comes with a fair bit of risk. On top of that, there are a lot of insane one-way poison cloud spots that definitely take practice in order to set up, and if you can't do these things, you're leaving a lot of the value on Viper on the table, and you definitely haven't mastered the hero. All these things combined together make Viper a pretty difficult character to master, and she is number 5 most difficult to master in the entire game. Now, the next character on our list, going into the number 4 spot for most difficult to master character in the entire game, we have Cypher. Now, Cypher at first could seem like he's pretty simple to learn. I mean, his camera just gets placed, you throw trap wires in obvious spots, and you seem to get kills on enemies. But as enemies get more crafty with your traditional spots on your trap wire, you have to get more crafty as well. A huge part of Cypher is also the playstyle around Cypher that can be incredibly difficult to master. Knowing how to mix up your traps in a way that will surprise the enemy, or knowing how to mix up where you're playing altogether to surprise the enemy. On top of that, Cypher is one of those characters where you have to master spacing. Like, if you have a camera on a site, how far away do you leave the site? Do you leave some of your traps on it, or do you take them both with you? If you're lurking behind enemies trying to get picked, how far do you push out? And if you're pushing on attack, do you use your traps to stop people from flanking you initially? Or do you save them to put them on the point after you already planted? These are all the questions that a Cypher player must ask, and playing Cypher can be incredibly difficult if you cannot master the tempo and the general playstyle behind Cypher. While yes, I do think that the skill floor on Cypher is pretty high. The amount of value that you can get from the very bottom is pretty high, and with no knowledge on Cypher, you can still get a fair amount of value. But I do think as far as mastering is concerned, Cypher is 100% one of the hardest characters in the entire game to master. Now, moving into top 3 territory, the third hardest character to master in the entire game is definitely Jett. Now, keep in mind, this is not a list for how good characters are, even though I did mention it here and there. Jett might not be the most powerful character in the game, but she still is one of the hardest to master. The thing is, knowing how to use all of her abilities in conjunction, her ultimate, her updraft, her cloud smoke, and of course, her tailwind, all these things require a great deal of foresight, diligence, and mechanical skill. Specifically, the fact that she can play in places where most characters would never play mean that you're always playing on the edge of death in an extremely aggressive and risky position. Jett is also the best opper in the game, and of course, opping comes with a fair bit of skill. If you are the best Jett in the world, you're a master of all of her abilities and her ultimate, you have the capability to single-handedly shift the entire dynamic of a game. But to get to that point, to get to the point where you're mastering Jett, not only do you have to have perfect control of the character's kit and movement, but you also have to have insane mechanical skill to back up all your aggressive plays. All those things combined mean that Jett is the third hardest character to master in the entire game. Now, moving into top 2 territory, the second hardest character to master in the entire game is definitely Reyna. Now, Reyna is hard for a lot of reasons, not just abilities, but her playstyle as well. See, the peaks of Reyna are so high, but in order to reach those peaks, you have to be so comfortable with their abilities. They have to come to you like you aren't even thinking about them. Kill one person, grab a phase, relocate. Kill another person, heal, and wait for the rotate. At the same time, throw out a leer. At the same time, peek an enemy. There's just so many things to think about when playing Reyna. And in order to smoothly use her entire kit as one constant flow, it can be very difficult. To go from someone that doesn't know how to play Reyna at all to becoming a master Reyna can take a fair bit of time and effort. And because of all these things combined, while yes, Reyna is a very high impact character if you master them, the skill floor on Reyna is way higher than something like Cypher. The skill floor, like the minimum amount of value you get on Reyna, it's like nothing. It's so high. The skill floor, to reach the skill floor, you have to be playing at such a high level, but also the skill ceiling is even higher than that. It is incredibly high, and Reyna is the second hardest character to master in the entire game. Now we're entering the hardest character to master in the entire game, and most of you already know because of process of elimination, but if you disagree with where I place any character on the list, do me a huge solid and smash the like button anyways, and definitely let me know in the comments down below. I'll be sure to try to reply to every single suggestion. Now, the hardest character to master in the entire game is Sova. Now, Sova is incredibly hard to master for the biggest reason, and it's his arrows. The bounce potential on recon and his damage arrows are insane. There are damage one-shot rollouts. There are Sova recon arrow rollouts that can go anywhere you want to. The ceiling on this hero is so high. There is so much potential. I mean, you're talking about some arrows that can literally bounce off of 2 places and go through the teleporter and show you a spot on the other side. And it's just insane what you can do with this hero if you master him. And while he might not be the best character in the game, I do think he's a very good character, but that's not what this tier list is about. It is about who has the highest skill ceiling in the game. And in my opinion, the highest skill ceiling in the entire game is definitely Sova, especially if you want to master all of his recon arrow spots, his damage arrow spots. Everything combined on Sova makes him a very difficult character to master, but if you put the time and effort into mastering Sova, you are almost guaranteed to bring so much value to your team, telling teammates exactly where enemies are, revealing them, setting up these insane damage arrow spots. The sky is the limit if you master this hero. Anyways, even if you agreed or disagreed with our list, do me a huge solid. Smash that sub button, but definitely share your thoughts down below. Are there any characters that you would change? I'm extremely confident that I got the easiest and the hardest characters correct, but that middle area sometimes can get a little dicey. So I definitely want to hear your opinions down below. Anyways, I think that's all we got for you today. Thanks for coming by. I'm Coach Mills, and until next time.